क्लियर आ रही है, पर वो कह रहे हैं मत लाइट नहीं ऑफ
We are
करिए।
going live.
इसे आई भी
Yes,
शेयर।
ma'am, we are live. We can begin.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I am on this webinar and I am happy to greet you all who have joined in into this webinar, which is going to speak or tell you all about male infertility, commonly encountered problems by the gynecologist. Now, you would be thinking, why am I speaking on male infertility? I am a IVF specialist. I am also a infertility clinician or obstetrician and gynecologist, basically. And we all know that every infertile couple first lands up to into a gynecologist, generally a obs and gynae person. And that is when we first time are encountered with male infertility and common questions which arise with that. So what am I going to do today? These are the questions which I thought are faced most commonly by gynecologists while treating infertile couples with semen abnormalities. We hardly examine the man, or all we do is ask the wife about her sexual life and about any problems in having sex. And if nothing is there, then we just order a semen analysis. And most of the times, the couple walk in with a semen analysis report. So, what am I supposed to know when I'm looking at the semen analysis report? One is effect of duration of abstinence before semen testing done. If it looks abnormal, I would definitely want to ask that how many days of abstinence did the man have before he went for semen testing. Another common problem which we all encounter is two different reports of the same man from two different labs done at a sort of distance of just few days or few weeks. How do we identify the correct report? What is a normal semen report? Then another problem which the patient walks in is a ultrasound of the man and says, oh, ultrasound says that there is a problem, there is varicocele and the semen count is low. So what should we do? Another problem which we see is if there are no sperms reported in the semen analysis, then what do we do as the next step and when do we refer our patients for higher treatment? And I brought in two important medically treatable problems where I thought that even general clinicians, gynecologists can treat these men, and that is obese men with a low semen analysis and also complain of sexual dysfunction, erectile dysfunction, ejaculatory problems. So, can we really sit in a gynae clinic and treat these men? And the last is antioxidants. Antioxidants are very, very freely prescribed and available for all semen problems. So, how far are we justified in giving these antioxidants while treating low semen parameters in infertile men? So, I go to the first slide, case one, normal female partner, mildly abnormal husband semen analysis after 10 days of abstinence. Is there any importance of lesser or longer duration of abstinence? What I want to ask you is, do you think that if he would have abstained for lesser days or abstained for more days, we would have got a normal semen analysis report? This is a very, very important question, and I thought I need to address this. And what does WHO recommend? WHO recommends pre-test abstinence interval of 2 to 7 days. Like it should not be less than 48 hours and not to be more than a week. And there is an impact of ejaculatory abstinence on semen analysis parameters. And this is a huge systematic review which was published in 2018 by Hansen BM in a very reputed journal with very high impact journal. And it says longer abstinence is associated with increase in semen volume and count marginally. But a trend appears towards improvement in these parameters with shorter abstinence. Which parameters? Motility, morphology, DNA fragmentation rates. So our reports are very varied and inconclusive. Some studies say that shorter abstinence gives us better morphologically sperms and motility is also better. whereas some studies say that longer abstinence is associated with increase in semen count. And we also see that in IUI and for IVF ICSI, we like to take samples where there's been a short abstinence. If they don't have intercourse, we tell them you ejaculate a sample out 2 days before and then come and give a sample for IUI ICSI. Because with shorter abstinence, we get better quality sperm. Possibly the morphology, motility, DNA fragmentation, which really matters, is better. Another very important observation, normal female partner, mildly subnormal semen analysis report. Will the first or second ejaculate make any difference? A lot of times when we ask the husband that go give a semen sample and he comes back with a very poor report, then we generally, happens in IUI especially, we say go try, give another sample and maybe it will be better. A lot of people ejaculate in spurts, the first spurt or the second one. Is there any difference? Should we ask them to try again and give a second sample, same time, same day? And the answer is the first fraction of the ejaculate is most effective for conception. And this is so important. It is known that the objective of the first fraction is to fertilize the egg. So the first fraction reaches the egg, whereas the second fraction makes the cervical reservoir. So it is always good to use the first fraction. If that is not good, then it is a rare chance that we would get better sperms in the second fraction. Very nice study I found, and I thought I must bring it forth to you. This is not related to normal gynecological practice. This is cases which require electro-ejaculation. They have neurologically intact men, they have an ejaculation, and for them we advise electro-ejaculation, which is done under general anesthesia. Now, here also, earlier what they used to do, they used to give multiple electric stimulation to the prostate and seminal vesicles to have multiple ejaculates. But then they found that there was no significant difference in the concentration, motility count, and total motile sperm count of the ejaculates, whether they were antegrade or retrograde. They were almost similar. The first and second were same. So if you get good number of sperms in the first ejaculate, it is of no use to go on giving them electric current stimulus for second, third, or fourth ejaculates. So we just have to remember that the first ejaculate is generally the best ejaculate. Then we come to another question. We all know that semen analysis is the first and generally the only test done to detect male infertility. Now I'm going to show you a few semen reports tested at different labs. How will you find which is more reliable? Now, this is a sample. Have a look. You can see here there is one report in continuation. This is a 2-page report from a very reputed lab. Then we say one report is from a government setup lab, and this report is also from a lab which doesn't look so decorated. How would you know which one is normal? In a panel discussion, I asked my panelists and they said, oh, this report is so nicely printed and it is from Lal's lab, so this has to be correct. And this is just a general lab from some government hospital, maybe not so good. No, this is not the case now. Look at these pointers. What do these pointers show? Don't look at anything here, but you can see that even the motility, the way they've written grade A, progressive, non-progressively motile, grade C is immotile, this all is very long gone. There are no 3 grades of motility. There is either motile or non-motile sperms. Out of the motile, they are either progressively motile or they move at the same place. We now don't see sluggishly motile, fast motile, nothing. But the only discriminatory point comes at the morphology. There you see normal morphology is 80%. Here morphology is just written normal, which has no meaning. And here you see morphology is 6%. More than 4% is normal. So having said that, here also if they write more than 4% is normal and 80% are normal morphological sperms, which is impossible. because normal semen sample has about 4 to 14% of normal sperms, maybe slightly more, up to 20%. But if the sperms are seen properly, they're evaluated properly, you don't get more sperms. So writing morphology normal means a technician was not even aware how to see the morphology. Morphology requires making a slide, staining it. All the sperms have to be immotile, and after the stain only the morphology can be evaluated, the head, the neck, the tail. And now they've seen, after Kruger's strict criteria, Tigerberg is the place from there where this criteria came up, we find that hardly very few sperms are really normal, and we need just about 4% of normal morphologically normal sperms to cause a pregnancy. And hence labs reporting 80% of normal sperms means the technician has been trained to do very good blood tests, maybe a urine analysis, but semen analysis requires special attention. So please be sure, I'll show you one more set of reports from two reputed labs, and you see, look at the morphology again, and you will be able to see what happens. One is sperm morphology, 80% normal, and here even morphology has been graded. 50% normal, abnormal 50%, out of that head, neck piece, tail, all in round figures. This is not possible. So these reports are generally concocted by the technician and given forth. Since the counts are normal, we don't worry about anything. We think, oh, everything is normal. But to know between two reports, to decide which lab to trust, it is important to go through the morphological criteria which they have used, and that will tell us that yes, this semen report has been reported by a technician who knows how to do a semen analysis. A normal semen analysis takes multiple hours to finish. First we look at the um, count. First thing is motility is seen, and then the count is seen. For that, you have to put in a new bias chamber or some cryotech chamber and immobilize all the sperms, and then only the counting can be done. When there are few sperms, it is easier to count. When there are too many sperms, then there are just conjectures which can vary from 50 million to 150 million also. So motility is very important. Counts lose their importance once they are over a certain number, say over 50 million. Motility is important and morphology is very important. And if we see these two parameters written correctly, we can gauge that these are the reports which we can rely. And generally it is technicians who are trained to do semen analysis, work in infertility centers. They are the ones who would produce good reports also. Similarly, the same patient, two reports in 1 month's duration, one shows a 36 million count and the other one shows a count which is so little, but morphology 3%, and the other one is showing 52% normal morphology. However, on the first semen analysis report, this couple was identified as unexplained infertility. And after the second report, only we said, oh, this is male factor. And then this patient went for IVF ICSI and conceived and has already got a child. So this is the difference in getting reports which are correct and the calculation is done correctly of the sperm concentration, of the sperm motility and morphology. So what is a normal semen report? I thought let me bring that reference point also to you, because now the total number of sperms per ejaculate is 39 million, whereas per ml the sperm concentration should be 15 million and above. See, earlier the 99 WHO reference analysis said we need more than 60 million sperms. Then 2004-5 came as 20 million, and now they've brought it down to even 15 million sperms if a man will be able to father his own child. And progressive motility is the most important part of the whole semen, 32%. That means 1/3 of the sperms should be progressively motile. Apart from that, morphology, normal forms, very few normal forms are required. Out of these millions and millions of sperms, just about 4% normal forms should be able to ensure that this man would be able to father his own child. Let us come to the next question now. Now, another thing I wanted to bring your attention to in the semen analysis report was peroxidase positive leukocytes. When we say round cells or pus cells, it means that these are immature sperm cells or these are pus cells. And all together, they all look as round cells or pus cells. We have to do a peroxidase test to see out of these which are really leukocytes, which means pus cells, or which are really immature sperm cells, which also are round cells and look similar. So only when we do a peroxidase test, we can say that this sample has enough pus cells to warrant looking for infection and controlling it. Now there is another case, normal female with mild oligoasthenoteratozoospermia, and on examination of male partner, there was varicocele, which was demonstrated by ultrasound on coughing while he was standing. What is to be done? Now, this is a report which again a lot of men walk in with, that, after the semen analysis report, which was found to be lower, I was given this test, ultrasound was done, and I have varicocele. What do you do for this? So this is subclinical varicocele. What is subclinical varicocele? When there is no varicocele, if we examine, palpate the scrotum and we examine the man while he's standing or he's lying down. Both ways there is no. The highest grade of varicocele will be when a man is lying down. That means no gravity is also acting, and still we see a venous plexus all around his scrotum. That is the highest or the most severest type of varicocele. If he's standing and then with gravity we see the sac which has a lot of veins in gauche, then we say this is grade 2 varicocele. And when he stands and he coughs, and then only the ultrasonologist can see the varicocele, or he lies down and he coughs, then that is subclinical varicocele, and nothing needs to be done for this type of varicocele. The subnormal semen parameters are not because of the varicocele. Varicocele only damages the sperm when it raises the testicular temperature for long duration, especially when a man is sitting or standing, or when he is lying down also the temperature is raised. Only on coughing, if the varicocele comes up, this little amount of temperature rising of the testes cannot make a subnormal, cannot make the semen subnormal, and hence no surgery is recommended for these people. Now, we get a lot of times a report of azoospermia. Patient walks in with a report that there's no sperm. How will we proceed? As a gynecologist sitting in my clinic, what is my next step? Well, my next step is see the volume, what is written. When they write azoospermia, maybe the volume is 0.5 ml. Then ask the man, did he spill the semen? Was it completely collected, or some of it just spilled and he collected whatever he could? If that is the case, then all you do you ask him to have another semen analysis more carefully. He would need to collect his semen. And two is, we also, if he says nothing like this happened, the volume is good, then we repeat the analysis and ask the technician, please centrifuge the sample. Centrifuging at a speed for some time gives us sperms in the sediment. I mean, brings all the sperms in the sediment. And then the technician examines the sediment of the semen sample and tells us, yes, there are sperms, but very few. And at least we get to know that there are sperms in this male, and we can probably do something with these sperms or look for more sperms elsewhere also. What are the pathological causes of low semen volume? This is just to tell you that maybe he has retrograde ejaculation, where instead of ejaculating outside, they ejaculate within their own urinary bladder. The man says that I have ejaculated, but there's no ejaculate outside. That means he's ejaculated inside his own bladder, and he passes urine, the semen would eject with that. Or an ejaculation is the ejaculatory duct obstruction could be there, congenital absence of the vas or seminal vesicles, hypogonadism, and sometimes there is idiopathic low volume semen samples. So we must know when there is a low sample first whether there's been spillage. If not, then get it centrifuged and then look at the sediment, and if there are sperms, then we know, oh yes, there are sperms, and we can possibly, by the help of assisted reproductive technology, be able to father his own child. I come to one more part of the same question. Now you are sitting in a clinic You don't do IVF. Which are the cases where you would suggest donor insemination without attempting surgical sperm retrieval from the testes? Which means that you've got a report of azoospermia, there are no sperms. Now, most of the men who come with the report of azoospermia come with this hope that if they go in for surgical retrieval, then testes would be making some sperms and we would be able to retrieve those sperms and use it by the technique of ART to reach his wife's eggs and he could have his own child. But there are some cases where you would say, don't go for surgical retrieval, there is no need for surgical retrieval. And these are the cases where affordability for IVF ICSI is not there. First thing is just look at the patient and ask them if they can afford IVF ICSI, even though it is becoming more and more affordable for the middle income people also. Like it would cost somewhere around 1 lakh plus maybe 20-25,000 in most of the centers. Yet, if they cannot afford IVF ICSI, then it's no use even trying to do a surgical retrieval. Even if we retrieve sperm, they can't afford, so it's no use to go in for that. And two is undescended testes. You can at least examine the man and ask him, see him or ask him whether he has undescended testes. And in this case, if the testes are not in the scrotum, then there is no use of going ahead with anything. So having said this, high serum FSH level, say over 40 MIU, and a very low testicular volume of less than 2.5. But then the microtessi has brought in sperms from both these type of patients. We used to once discard patients who did have FSH levels of over 40 MIU and testicular volume of less than 3 cubic centimeters. But now with these reports which have appeared in literature, chances of sperm retrieval using microtessi is similar for men with elevated FSH level than for men with lower FSH. And they took FSH levels over 45 also, and they still got almost more than 50% sperm retrieval and same pregnancy rates also. Similarly, testicular volume does not affect sperm retrieval rates at centers where microtessi is done, though microtessi involves opening up the whole testes and then dissecting the tubules under microscope. It's an expensive procedure. The cost is almost similar to the cost of IVF. So, well, it's just for your knowledge, and you can refer your patients for microtessi if you find very small testicular volume or very high serum FSH. Now I bring in an obese couple. An infertile couple presenting with a very obese husband, BMI 30 kg per meter square with sperm count of 2 million, and also says that he has erectile dysfunction and has small testes. Wife, all is normal. Can you treat this couple medically? This is for my gynecological colleagues, that if you find a very obese husband and he truly complains that he has erectile dysfunction, that means what is happening, his testosterones are going down and his estrogen levels are going up. What is happening? Maybe obesity is a possible cause of secondary hypogonadism and associated infertility for this man. Aromatase enzyme is highly expressed in peripheral fat tissue. It converts testosterone to estradiol. This increase in estradiol production inhibits secretion of LH and FSH from the pituitary. Reduced level of LH and FSH leads to reduction in testosterone synthesis as well as sperm production and then to infertility. So if we can stop this conversion of test, if we can stop this conversion of testosterone to estradiol in the fat tissue by any drug, then we will be able to counteract the physiological effect of elevated estradiol. And here, aromatase inhibitors can normalize serum testosterone levels and thus spermatogenesis. Also, this is coming up in a big way, and we have started treating men who don't want to go in for IVF ICSI immediately and want to give themselves a chance. This is one 158 kg man. I brought the case here that you can see the semen has risen from 1 million to 21 million with anastrozole therapy after 5 months. So it does improve, and total testosterone goes up, estradiol goes down. So it is not the levels of estradiol which really matter. It is the ratio between testosterone and estradiol which truly matter. And you can see how testosterone rose from 151 to 423 and estradiol from 47 went down to 20. And with this, What are the aromatase inhibitors available to us? Well, we have anastrozole and we have letrozole. So letrozole is given in doses of 2.5 milligram a day for these men, and anastrozole is used as 1 milligram per day. Testolactone is not available, so we won't talk about it. I just want you to know that you can try this drug if the man doesn't have any side effects of having this drug in the form of hot flushes or gastric intolerance. You can continue one of the two drugs, whichever he finds more comfortable in taking, because it's just once a day drug, and maximum 5 months could bring out the semen to be better, or his estradiol levels lower than what they were baseline and testosterone levels higher. Now I come to the last question. Is there a role of empirical treatment with antioxidants in males with suboptimal semen parameters? Normally, this is the most usual treatment which is given forth by us to men when they say, oh, I don't want to go for any treatment like IUI or IVF-ICSI, I want my sperm count to improve. Then all we think is, let us write some antioxidants. And there are so many on the horizon right now for us. The pharmaceutical fraternity has brought in so many medicines by the name of Maxoza, Preternia, UBQ, Carnitors, all type of vitamins, that we start prescribing these medicines, which are so expensive with very undecided effects which it could have on the male fertility. We just give them as placebos. We prescribe them and we say, okay, let's have another semen analysis after 2, 3, 4 months. Maybe it is the normal sperm cycle of the male which is on the upward trend, and the medicines are taken at the same time, and the man comes back, oh, my reports are better. Or if it is already the semen cycle is on the downward trend, and they come back, oh, I took this medicine and it has harmed me, my sperm count has gone lower. So are we really justifying which are the common ones which we can use if we want to use, which will not be very expensive, and they would have other effect also on the men, other beneficial effect on men's health status? The most abundant antioxidant in semen of fertile men is vitamin C. It protects sperm DNA from free radical damage and improves sperm quality. The dose is high. It is 1000 milligram a day. So it is very cheap to use vitamin C as one single antioxidant, which can really cure free radicals if that is the reason for the sperm count being low. If that is not the reason, then also vitamin C is water soluble, secretes in urine, so it will not harm the man in any way. Vitamin E, which is a fat soluble vitamin, is another antioxidant which protects sperm cell membrane from damage. Dose is 600 milligrams per day, improves sperm motility. So even vitamin E can be given for 1 month at a stretch, a week's gap, and then 1 month at a stretch. And at least if it doesn't help the sperm quality, it will help other functions of the man. Selenium is given as 200 microgram. Then GSH or glutathione is one more compound. Along with vitamin E, it is said to increase sperm concentration, and a few products have these two combinations. L-acetylcysteine, 3 grams a day, also increases sperm motility. So these are the commonly used antioxidants. But what I like to use most is a combination of vitamin C and vitamin E, which you could possibly use without causing any harm to the man, without putting financial pressure, and still giving him a chance that if there is a DNA damage from free radicals in his semen, then there could be some improvement. This was one of the biggest US clinical trial of 174 couples, which was randomized and which was looked into very carefully. Antioxidant intervention were given a daily supplement in the tablet form, which had 500 milligram of vitamin C, 2000 international units of vitamin D3, 400 IU vitamin E, 1 milligram folic acid, 20 milligram zinc, and 200 milligram selenium, and 1000 milligrams of L-carnitine. So you can see they've given all the vitamins which I've spoken about in slightly lower doses, and they found no effect on sperm concentration, motility, or morphology, or the rate of DNA fragmentation. This was presented in the ESHRI conference in Barcelona, Spain in 2019. So we feel that antioxidants do not appear to improve sperm parameters or DNA fragmentation among men with male factor infertility. The study authors have concluded this. And even though previous data, and separate small studies on 30 people, 60 people, or 40 people show that antioxidants do improve pregnancy rates uh, in vitro fertilization, but we do not know whether these improve pregnancy rates when they are used in men directly and they are given a chance to conceive normally. So having said this, I feel that you can prescribe antioxidants if you find no other problems there, to buy some time to let the couple decide whether repeat semen analysis also says that they need to go in for ART. It is not necessary to push people for ART when they are mentally not prepared. They take medicines for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and then they can sort of go to standard labs, have a semen analysis, and see if there is improvement or no improvement. With this, I bring my concluding slide. We know now what to do in following situations. We know what is the effect of duration of abstinence before semen testing done. We know that 2 to 7 is ideal by WHO, but longer or shorter should not warrant a repeat semen analysis unless it is very subnormal. Two labs, different reports. How to identify correct report is look at the morphological parameters. What is normal semen report is 15 million, 32% progressively motile, and 4% or more morphologically normal sperms. Ultrasound diagnosis of varicocele alone does not warrant any treatment. No surgical intervention to be advised. If there is azoospermia, look at the volume. If the volume is right, think of doing a centrifugation and repeat semen analysis. If still you find no sperms, then you need them to be referred to higher centers. Obese men with a normal wife, along with obesity, they have a subnormal semen analysis and sexual dysfunction. Not only sexual dysfunction, they have gynecomastia also. These are the men who would benefit from something like aromatase inhibitor. And antioxidants in treating low semen parameters have very little role, yet we do give them, but it is better to use simple medicines, inexpensive medicines, because we do not know whether they will definitely help the man or not. So I thank you all for giving me a reason to scratch my brains. Now, I'm not going to leave you here because we are going to have some puzzles now. Can you find all 5 Ys hidden in this image? I give you a minute to do this before I get on to your questions, which you put on for me.
Yes, ma'am. Minimize the zoom and go back to this question answer sheet.
Yeah, I'm going to just see that. The question answer share. Yeah. Oh my goodness, there are so many questions there already. Hi, can you see me? Can you hear me? Tejas?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. We can.
Okay, all right. So I can start answering the question straight away.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Treatment of erectile dysfunction. Well, you have to see what is the reason for erectile dysfunction, Rashmi Singh. Rashmi, you are from New Delhi. See, I'll tell you, most of the men, if you go deep into their history, please examine the wife. If she has vaginismus, she doesn't allow you examination, then maybe that is the starting point of his erectile dysfunction. And if you can investigate that, then probably counseling the wife or doing some type of surgery for her to, sort of take care of her constricted vaginal ring or of her hymen, which is still there, might help them to have proper intercourse, and he will become all right with his erectile dysfunction. If the wife is totally normal, allows a normal per vaginum examination, per speculum examination, then the erectile dysfunction has probably taken birth inside the man himself, unless he's very obese. So you have to look at different causes. If obesity is a reason, then either treat obesity or use aromatase inhibitors. If it is starting from the wife, then you have to counsel the wife, make sure that she doesn't have vaginismus and doesn't stop him from having intercourse, because that is the biggest sort of failure for erection for a man if the wife doesn't allow intercourse. So look into these things, and if there is pure erectile dysfunction, then a urologist would be able to treat him best. Then Jatinder from Chandigarh asks how to interpret increased agglutination in semen analysis. See, nowadays, increased agglutination is not a problem anymore in semen analysis. If it is such and you feel that sperms are not being released once intercourse has taken place, then IUI becomes very good option of treating such semen. When you process a semen sample, then you liquefy it, and when you wash a semen sample, then all the sperms spread out and there is no more agglutination. So the best way of treating agglutination is this. However, if the viscosity is very high, then maybe you can use something like vitamin C high doses. But nowadays, all we do is just advise them IUI if we feel the agglutination on examination is too high. And on postcoital test, we don't find sperms reaching the cervix. Then Roma from Mumbai, what prevention should be taken for immunologic infertility? Roma, very important question. When I started my infertility practice, this was one of the most important questions, but now it has taken a backseat. And why is it so? Because the coming in of IUI and IVF ICSI takes care of immunologic infertility totally. So if you think that there is a cervical immunological factor or a sperm immunological factor, both are taken care of by IUIs and IVF, where sperm is washed and then used, or the sperm is injected into the egg. So immunological factors don't come to interfere in fertilization. Mahavir from Surat, which medications are referred for genital tract infection? Good, I did not touch this because I thought that true genital tract infections are generally taken up by urologists. I am glad you brought this question up, Mahavir. See, one thing is, please do not diagnose genital tract infection on a semen culture report. Ask the man, does he have any pain anywhere? Any pain in ejaculation? Any pain in urination? Any pain in erection? Or if you examine the man, palpate his scrotum, whether there's orchitis, or palpate his vas to see whether there is any inflammation of the vas, or prostate, a PR examination will tell you about the prostate seminal vesicles. If there's no tenderness anywhere and he has no problems, then possibly the semen culture which says that there is infection is not a Maggie infection, not a male accessory gland infection. It is possibly contamination. And if you take a close history, ask the man that when he was collecting semen, did some of it spill on his own organ? And if that has happened on the prepuce and he has collected it from there, then a lot of skin organisms will come into it to show genital tract infection. So if there is genuine genital tract infection, then quinolones or other antibiotics as per culture report are good. Quinolones are good, but have to be given for 6 to 12 weeks. No infection is treated in 2 weeks for men. So it takes a long time, and the best is symptomatic reversal. Tells us that yes, the man is getting better, but even after symptomatic reversal of painful urination or painful erection, one should continue these antibiotics for almost 10 weeks to 12 weeks. Bhuneshwari from Hyderabad, does varicocele treatment has any side effects? See, surgery of varicocele is a big treatment. And once you refer someone for varicocele surgery and it is done properly, it will have no side effects. No surgery which is done properly would have any side effects, and varicocele surgery especially. But if it is very long standing varicocele which has brought in changes in the blood flow to the testes already, has caused so much of sclerosis around the blood vessels, then you may not have much benefits of this treatment, and one should not wait for more than 9 months after varicocele surgery to see benefits. If the benefit has to come, it would show in 8 to 9 months. So please advise after varicocele treatment that the husband wife should have regular intercourse. If she doesn't get pregnant in 4 to 6 months, get a semen analysis done, see whether there's been any improvement or not. You can repeat it after 9 months. After that, it is like maybe there will be no more further improvement if there has been no improvement till now. And this is from Mumbai, Ishangadi at gmail.com. Do we need to evaluate all samples for sperm DNA fragmentation? No, you don't need to see this at all. Please do not do sperm DNA fragmentation for routinely for your patients. This is only to be done in very special circumstances in the IVF labs. If they find that there is failure of fertilization despite a good ICSI done, despite picking up morphologically normal sperms, or maybe in a man who's diabetic or who's a chronic smoker, then only it is to be done. Dharashri from Rivari, which criteria is more important, morphology or motility of sperm? Motility. Motility is more important. Morphology is only a criteria which makes you think about a semen report, whether it has come from a person who knows how to do good evaluation or not. But motility is extremely important. I sometimes feel more than count motility is important. Very motile sperms, counts of even less than 15 million would be able to make a woman pregnant. Then again from Ishangadi, anastrozole dose and how long to be given. I think you missed out on my slide. It is 1 milligram a day. In that place, if you want to use letrozole, which is more easily available, is 2.5 milligrams a day for 5 months. Then again, Jatinder from Chandigarh, role of clomiphene citrate in male infertility has disappeared. We do not recommend. Clomiphene citrate for male infertility. Rupali from New Delhi, how long to give letrozole and anastrozole and when to evaluate the TE ratio after starting? See, Rupali, it is very interesting that we tried to look into the testosterone estradiol ratio and we could hardly find, because units of testing total testosterone and serum estradiol is or sometimes different in different places. It is the value which you find of total estradiol, of estradiol and total testosterone. So do one thing, just get the total testosterone and the estradiol levels, and then you can just repeat these two tests after 2 months and then after 5 months and see, is the testosterone rising? Because it is not the free testosterone which we are looking at here. We are looking at the total testosterone. And is the estradiol going down? Is the erectile dysfunction becoming better with this treatment? If all this is happening, then even if the man doesn't lose weight, which we would always advise him to do, he may not have lost weight. But if these two parameters start correcting, then his intercourse becomes better and his erectile dysfunction becomes better. And along with that, the semen parameters also become better. Then is Tejashri. Oh my goodness. Okay, then is Tejashri from New Delhi. Do you get testosterone estradiol ratio before starting aromatase inhibitor? Yes. I like to do a total testosterone level and a serum estradiol level. All I do is levels. I don't see the ratio at all, though the ratio was described as 1:10 testosterone, estradiol in picograms and testosterone in nanograms. So it's very difficult to always compare. So what I do is whatever my lab gives, I see the testosterone level. And then on a evaluation further on, I see whether these levels are going up or down. And similarly, the estradiol in picograms per. Again, what is your opinion on CoQ100? See, this is antioxidant. Like I enumerated a few antioxidants, this is also one of them. And you can always use it. But antioxidants will only work if there is a problem. If there are increased ROS, oxidative stress है वहाँ पे, that is the place where whether it is CoQ or vitamin C or vitamin E or pentoxyphylline or carnitine, anything will work then only. So you have to formulate your own idea that what would you give if you find a patient with low sperm counts. What I like to give is vitamin C, vitamin E, and sometimes carnitol. So you have to see what makes your patient feel better. Where do patients have normal conceptions after taking antioxidants for 4, 5, 6 months, but not longer than that? And that is it. Anandi Gupta from Ghaziabad, duration of letrozole, I've already told you, no breaks, 5 months. Rachit, Rachit Rachita Chavla, Sonipat. Ma'am, how long do we give treatment in hypohypothesis? This is again a topic which I did not touch because normal gynecologists don't like to treat these cases. See, it is a matter of what is the total testosterone level, and is the sperm absolutely azoospermic? In such cases, when you give a combination, I like to give combination of HCG, which is human chorionic gonadotropin, with FSH, follicular stimulating hormone. So if you use HMG, that has a little HCG also in it. So we can make a combination of these two drugs. HCG given twice a week, injection, just 2000 units is good enough. And along with that, HMG injections are given alternate day. Say 150 units alternate day of FSH, and HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin, 2000 units given twice a week, or say every 2 days break. So this has to continue for about a year. And every 3 months, you do a semen analysis to find if there has been any sperms which have started appearing in semen. Intercourse should be advised because a lot of times we don't have a semen analysis, but the semen becomes better and the wife could get pregnant also. But if she doesn't get pregnant every 3 months, a semen analysis will tell us whether this treatment is helping or not. It's a long term treatment, injections have to be taken. You can counsel your patients. Nowadays, a lot of subcutaneous injections, even in the HMG and HCG, are available, which are for self administration. So, like people take insulin 2 times or 3 times a day. Just tell them that you will have to continue to take these injections 3 times a week, which is not so much, and they are all self administration. So, it doesn't make it very difficult. Rupali comes with a question: how do we diagnose COX in male genital tract? Well, I think very few of us gynecologists would be interested in diagnosing COX in male genital tract. We might find in semen analysis increased pus cells after doing a peroxidase test. And once we find increased pus cells and we don't find anything in culture, then the next thing which comes to us is look for tuberculosis. So I think, Rupali, what you can do is look for round cells, and if round cells are there, which are not peroxidase positive, I mean, if there are peroxidase positive round cells, which means there are pus cells, then you subject the patient to a very no touch technique semen culture. Even one drop of semen is good enough. It must go directly into the sterile container. If that shows no growth, then one has to resort to uh, the TB culture. Ma'am, is there any role of aromatase inhibitors or clomiphen citrate in non-obese men? Yes, there is appearing a role of aromatase inhibitors in men who are non-obese also, but have a um, have clomiphen citrate is not really recommended much nowadays for any men, Shalini, but aromatase inhibitors, there are studies which show that non-obese men, they did try aromatase inhibitors with variable results. Some studies showed that they did get an improvement in sperm count, some did not show. So there may not be much role of using aromatase inhibitors or clomiphen citrate in clear-cut cases where we have normal men, non-obese men, non-smokers, no other problems there, and subnormal sperm counts, 1 or 2 million. These days, we would definitely move on for a IVF ICSI treatment rather than thinking of giving them any of these drugs for 5 to 6 months. Then there's another question by Dr. Mishra, Mumbai. Does oral testosterone have any role in male infertility treatment? Well, oral testosterone only has treatment in younger boys when they come with hypo, so that they have good development. And apart from that, in older men also, testosterone directly would have the same effect as estradiol has, because testosterone on the on the long run will suppress FSH-LH. So just for the initial spurt, testosterone could have a role. Dr. Isha Meerut, any specific method for preparation of semen in patients with oligospermia? Does centrifugation, spin, and time affect? Well, this is again a very good question, Isha. And nowadays, there are just two methods. One is swim up and one is density gradient. So we would use one of the two methods. We generally like to use density gradient because it causes less of spinning, and it uses a density gradient to trap all the abnormal sperms and the less motile sperms, and the gradient gives us a better sperm. So I think that density gradient is a good method to cause um, this type of sperm, which is oligospermia, prepared. Then simple washes have also been used. Say the sperm count is very low, then you can neither do a density gradient in them, you will find no sperms, neither a swim up will help you to get good sperms, and sometimes just a simple wash with very little centrifugation, spin, and you collect the semen and you inseminate the person. Another very important thing is, please have the sperm preparation in the same place where you're going to inseminate, because such type of samples warrant even faster insemination, and the death time should be lowest as far as possible. Normally, we say that within 1 hour of ejaculation and preparation of the person is inseminated with these oligospermic samples, then they have a better chance of conception. That also, if she is ovulated within the last 12 hours, where we feel that the oocyte would be picked up by the tube and would sit in the fimbria for almost 12 hours before it is impregnated and it starts moving in the tube. So this is what I have to tell about oligospermia, and I don't know if there are any more questions because I can see a large column there.
Ma'am, we'll wait for a few more questions to come in. By then, you can give a takeaway message.
Okay. My takeaway message to all of you is that a history from the man is very important. Examination is maybe in our era was not very comfortable for us. We were not taught male examination, but now all the new FNBs, the fellows who are coming out of from various places, whether it is South India, North India, western part of India, from everywhere, they are taught to deal with male examination of the genitals like men gynecologists examine females. I think there should be no inhibition to females examining males. And if you start examining, I think you would be so good, better than a urologist in finding out problems and finding out pathologies. Two is important. Second thing, very important, is a careful history taking is very important, because so many times, when they come and they say that, we're not getting pregnant, first time is sexual intercourse, what is the frequency, and then one says, oh, it is like 4 times a month, and then the wife, when you take her for examination, she says maybe once in 4 months. And when you start examining her, that is the first point where you get an idea that the wife is so afraid of having a physical examination. First thing is, she would hesitate in going down to lie down on the table. And then over there, examination, if she doesn't allow you, then you know that all erectile dysfunctions arise from vaginismus. And we have to treat the wife psychologically as well as physically to overcome her fear. If she does not overcome, then the only shortcut to pregnancy is you will have to do IUI or IVF, and that also you may have to resort to anesthesia in girls who have extreme degree of vaginismus. And agglutination nowadays should not impose any stress on our minds, because if a semen sample is reported to have increased viscosity or increased agglutination, advise IUI for them, especially postcoital test. I am quite a proponent of postcoital test because I feel that is one opportunity I always have to sort of examine the female on every visit. Otherwise, all what happens, you look at you do an ultrasound, you see the blood test report and you prescribe your treatment. You have not touched the patient otherwise. Putting in a speculum gives us so much idea to the cervical health, to the type of intercourse they would be having, whether she's even allowing complete penetration or not, whether cervical mucus is healthy, there's any cervicitis, a drop of mucus which is full of sperms gives you the whole story away that, oh, great, there's no problem in sexual intercourse. But if you find that you found no sperms in, and I'll tell you 50% of my infertile patients, I don't find sperms in a post-coital test. And that is when I know that they are struggling with intercourse. And this is the basic form of infertility which we find. So my take-home message is that examining the woman is even very important, more than examining the man. But yes, examination of the man also is important after you've examined the woman if the semen is abnormal. If the semen is normal, that is the end of the story of examining the man. But yes, if the semen is normal, then examination of the woman becomes very important, because maybe the woman doesn't allow proper penetration and intercourse, and hence pregnancy is not happening. So semen analysis from a good lab, normal semen parameters, everything okay. All right, sexual intercourse okay, there is no difficulty. Then you start looking into the woman about the problems. But if you find that, I got another question. Uh, okay. Any role of FNAC in current era where we can surgically retrieve on day of oocyte retrieval? What is it? Centers for Azoospermia. Right. Very important question. There is no role of FNAC alone nowadays at all. You have to do surgical retrieval if you have doubts. If you think it is non-obstructive azoospermia, you can also do a retrieval earlier and freeze the sperms, so that you are sure and you've not stimulated a woman unnecessarily, and on the day of oocyte retrieval you find no sperms and you say, I'm sorry. If you've got facilities for micro TISA, you can leave it for the day of oocyte retrieval, whether it's non-obstructive or obstructive azoospermia. But if it is non-obstructive azoospermia, then it is better to do a surgical retrieval earlier, so that you are sure you don't have facilities for micro TESI. So you've done surgical retrieval and you start the wife stimulation. But FNAC has no role, where you are just looking at sperm, sending it for histopathological analysis and say, oh, this is Sertoli only syndrome, or this is no sperms found, or immature sperm found. It doesn't tell us anything whether we will be able to retrieve sperms for the man to be able to father his own child. Another question, Dr. Yovika Gurugram, if the husband semen report shows decreased motility, rest all parameters were normal, how should we proceed then? Well, IUI is a good method if the husband semen report shows decreased motility, because you can concentrate a semen sample. And once you concentrate, then maybe on all IUIs, you'll find a 50% motility goes up to 90% on concentration. So if there's decrease in motility, counts look all right, volume is all right, then please go in for IUI. And if you find a reasonable motility on after preparing the sample, go ahead with IUI. It should give you dividends. Then Shri Harsha from Guntur. Could you elaborate genetic testing in male infertility? Yes, it is very important, especially for prognosticating and childbearing, especially for azoospermic males or very severe oats. Genetic testing should be done. And what are the three genetic tests which are to be done in these males? One is the karyotype, two is Y chromosome microdeletion, and the third one is 2C CFTR gene mutation for bilateral vas absence. Now, if there is obstructive azoospermia, then CFTR gene mutation is the only test you need to do. But if there is non-obstructive azoospermia, then you need to do a karyotyping to see whether there is Klinefelter's or a mosaic Klinefelter's, or you need to rule out a Y chromosome microdeletion. Now, why is it important? Because in Y chromosome microdeletion, there are different types A, B, C microdeletion. And if we find a certain deletion where we find sperms and we are using them for having their own child, then we need to counsel them that a male child will have the same defect which you have always. It will 100% be transmitted in a male child, where the girl child will have no problems. And Klinefelters also, we need to counsel patients that there is a chance that your child may be born with Klinefelters again. Then Dr. Isha from Meerut. Now, about MTHFR gene mutation, I need to just tell you one thing, that if you find bilateral absence of vas deferens, then it is more important to do this gene mutation in the wife rather than man. Because if both of them carry, the man 90% will have CFTR gene mutation. If the wife also has, then there is a greater chance that the child will suffer from this problem and from other ducts of the body, where the child would have later on respiratory problems and other ductules of the body may be less developed. Dr. Isha from Meerut. In couple with non-consummation of marriage, is an intravaginal semen sample installation prefer, ma'am, or an IUI, or both? I think intravaginal semen sample installation should be the first choice, and a lot of women get pregnant with that. If it doesn't work for say 6 months, then IUI becomes mandatory. 6 months of intravaginal semen sample is not just one intravaginal. It is on a daily basis around ovulation that the man ejaculates, you collect it in a syringe, and then the woman or the man injects it into the vagina. Then Paritosh Bagh West, Mednipur, live spam or processed sperm inside female genital tract. Very important question. I think I just have time for this. This is a very, very important question. Lifespan is very small. Once you've inseminated inside the uterus, we don't have a cervical reservoir. If only on normal intercourse a cervical reservoir forms, then the sperm stay there for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, even 100 hours they have been seen post one single vaginal intercourse. But if we put them by IUI inside the uterus, there is no cervical reservoir. Within a few minutes, they have crossed the whole female genital tract, the tubes. And in those minutes, if they hit the egg sitting in the infundibulum of the tube, they will fertilize it. If they don't hit the egg and the egg is somewhere else still going to be ovulated from the ovary, then they all are discharged into the peritoneal cavity. So lifespan of processed sperm in any case is not more than 2 hours, because all the protection of the sperms is removed in the washing. The sperm capacitation starts as soon as the sperms are processed. So the protective action of the seminal plasma on the sperm is lost by removing it from the sperm. The sperm is suspended in culture media, which doesn't prevent the starting of capacitation. Once capacitation starts, these sperms are good for maybe 1.5 to 2 hours, maximum 3 hours. After that, they don't live anymore. Do I have time to take up more questions, Tejas?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You can.
Gupta from Mumbai. Any drug to increase the motility of sperms? I would want you all to do research on this. There is so many research done with very inconclusive answers. One of us from India can do some research on this and tell us which is the best drug to increase the motility of sperms. However, I find all the antioxidants may have some role in improving motility of sperms, but otherwise, only the process of sperm concentration in IUI gives us better motile sperm than what there is in the normal semen sample. Then there is another question from Dr. Anitha Giri, Guntur again. Tessa sample should we do twice on the day of retrieval and prior? Well, if you have facilities for freezing of the Tessa sample, then you do it prior and use it on the day of oocyte retrieval. But sometimes the sample is very inadequate or you can't freeze the sample. In that case, it is best to do it on the day of retrieval, but this is in obstructive azoospermia, Anita. In non-obstructive, you will never know when you fail to retrieve sperms, especially if you are not doing a micro TISA. So if you have facility for micro TISA, please do it on the day of retrieval only. But if you don't have facility for micro TISA, retrieve the sperms before. And in obstructive azoospermia, there is no problem in retrieving it before and freezing because you get ample sperms. So you can do it either on the day of OCR or prior, both ways, but freeze your samples. After semen collection, after how much time should we do IUI? This is Dr. Alpana Rajput. Um, See, after semen collection, do it as soon as possible. Semen collected, allow it to liquefy. The technician is standing there, immediately process starts. The process is completed in 40 minutes. You pick up the sample and reach it into your patient. And I like to do my IUIs at 44 to 48 hours of giving them the HCG trigger in absence of a LH surge. So I always see the LH surge. I make sure the LH surge has not started when I give them HCG injection in the evening at 6 o'clock. And then after that, what I do is that if I've given the HCG today, then day after tomorrow at 2 o'clock, I ask them to come to me. The girl has an ultrasound to see if she's ruptured. See, in IVF, we know HCG causes trigger of ovulation after 36 hours. So if LH surge has not started and we've given HCG, then 36 hours would be morning 6 o'clock if you've given HCG at 6 in the evening. So leave the next day, come to the next morning, 6 o'clock to evening 6, somewhere the egg would be released, and an egg is living in the genital tract of the woman for 12 to 16 hours. So within 12 hours, if we do IUI and we can reach the sperms, it should go and hit an egg, which is sitting there. Maybe it was released 12 hours ago, 10 hours ago, 2 hours ago, or just 2 minutes ago. But if it is being picked up by the tube, then the sperm will be able to hit it. A role of gonadotropins for treatment and doses duration. Well, where are you using gonadotropin? This is important. If you are using for unexplained infertility and you planned ovarian stimulation with IUI, then the dose should be absolutely low normal doses, like 75 units every day. But then also it is important to sort of monitor your patient that she should not get hyperstimulated. Our goal is 2 follicles of 18 millimeter, maximum 3, never more than that. If there are more than that, avoid IUI and avoid intercourse. Do not do anything, just leave them as such. But otherwise, 75 units daily is good for normally ovulating women, non-PCOS. For PCOS, look at her ovarian volume, look at her AMH, and then give gonadotropin. You can start with 50 units, and in that case, you use recombinant gonadotropins. Then Dr. Gupta from Mumbai, should we do IUI after confirming ovulation? As you say, span of processed sperm is 2 to 3 hours. Yes, ideally it should be done, but please, one thing is very important. Whenever you diagnose LUF, don't stop doing IUI, because LUF is a diagnosis which is very, very indefinite. We cannot always say that it is luteinized and ruptured follicles. A lot of time the egg is released and the follicle reforms again, and you think it is LUF, whereas the egg has been released. So please plan your IUI that it is done within 48 hours of giving HCG. And the best is after ovulation has happened, but you can't call your patient every 2 hours to see whether ovulation has happened or not. So the best is, if you have facilities, I do a blood LH surge. You can do a urine LH surge at least before giving the HCG trigger. The patient does it home, or I I send a blood sample for LH at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and I get the report in about an hour. So for me at 5 o'clock, LH, which is less than 20, if I give HCG, will not cause ovulation before 36 hours. And I should be safe in doing IUI at 46 or 48 hours.
We
What is
can
a,
take one more last question
yeah,
and the lecture.
uh, I'll take two more questions. I'll answer Dr. Alka Goel first. 48, 72 hours abstinence is okay for husband before giving sample for IUI. There is no need for abstinence if the husband's semen count is normal and he's sure that he has no problem in giving a semen sample after having had intercourse the previous night. And Mohita Singhal, your question is what is the normal range of FSH, LH and cutoff for surgical sperm retrieval? If you're not doing micro TISA, then anything over 35 or 40 MIU or FSH is high enough to say that in normal TISA or TESA, you will not be able to retrieve sperms. But if you're doing micro TISA, there is no cutoff range for FSH for sperm retrieval. I thank you, Doc Mode, for supporting so many questions. And I think I need to say bye-bye. To all my listeners on this webinar. I'm thankful for your attention. All the questions really made me feel good. And I can see questions still coming up, but I think we have already overshot with the time. And I only want to wish you one thing: stay safe, stay indoors, go out well protected, wear a mask, take observe social distancing, and you are all doctors, so be careful. You have to look after your children, your families, so be always prepared that anytime you have to see a patient, you should be in a protective gear or at least a face shield and gloves. Thank you very much. Namaste.